Yeah, we are live.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's featured talk on designing clinical evidence for medical devices. I'm Aishwarya Varpe, and I'll be moderating today's session. We have Manish with us and Kash. So I'd request, before we start the session, I'd like to briefly introduce the ecosystem behind today's webinar. And I'll request Manish to briefly give introduction to Venture Center and lead through the program.
Thanks, Aishwarya. Hope my screen is visible to everyone. So I'll just give a quick 1 minute introduction to Venture Center and the program. So Venture Center is basically a Section 8 not-for-profit company which was incorporated in 2007. So it is supported by different national ministries like NSTDB from DST, BARAI, Government of Maharashtra, and Defense Innovation Organization. So all these national ministries have helped in running different programs and development of new facilities at Venture Center. It is a first CSIR incubator, and it is the campus is known as the NC Innovation Park. So our purpose is to nucleate and nurture world-leading inventive ventures. So we support science-intensive and knowledge-intensive startups. So and we are sector agnostic. So we nurture the startups in health and rehab domain, energy, environment, engineering, automation, agriculture, food, feed, and nutrition. 50% of the startups belong to the healthcare domain. 30% belongs to the energy and environment domain. So we support them for different incubation and innovation support services. This is how our complete ecosystem looks like, starting from the incubation ecosystem to mentoring pool, then different funding programs through which we support our startups. We have on-campus infrastructure facilities to provide incubation services. We have information databases and different partnerships with different institutions to support the startups. We have on-campus prototyping labs, proof of concept generation labs like plug and play labs, analytical labs, including Center for Clean Energy and Green Hydrogen, Food, Feed and Nutrition Lab, and Biopharma Analysis Center. Under our innovation support portfolio, we have regional information, we have regulatory information and facilitation center, which is conducting today's event for you, and technology transfer team as well as the IP team. So this is how our complete ecosystem works in supporting deep tech startups. So this program is run under the support of DSNED and Blockchain for Impact BFI through our Leap Global Accelerator program. So the global program is basically targeted towards helping the cohort of startups that we have selected under this program to scale internationally, to enter into the international markets, as well as attract investments from the foreign investors, establishing partnerships, etc. So we have a cohort of nearly 15 startups under this 12-month equity-free accelerator, which has 8 healthcare startups and 7 sustainability startups. These startups will be receiving one-on-one mentoring from the curated mentors, expert mentors. They will be showcasing their innovations through the international participation from the expert consultation as well as the regional boot camps. These are our international partners for the Deep Global program. So with this short introduction, I request Aishwarya to take the discussion forward.
Thank you, Manish. So I'd like to briefly introduce RIFC, which is Regulatory Information and Facilitation Center, which is a joint initiative of BIRAC and Venture Center under the BRBC Regional Bio Innovation Center program. So we aim to provide assist to bio entrepreneurs, medtech startups in planning, seeking, and securing of regulatory approvals, right from general advisory to planning their regulatory pathways, standard interpretation, quality management, implementation, clinical trial planning, and we also have services for food and nutrition, general advisory. Till now, we have served to 250 plus startups and license and approvals. We have assisted 50 plus. ISO certifications, we have assisted our 20 plus. Additionally, we have an infrastructure facility support, which is an ISO 13485 certified medtech clean room facility, which provides a controlled environment to manufacture and assemble products in a high quality assurance and regulatory standard compliance facility. We have received a gold award in service enterprise category at CII AMTZ MedTech Quality Champion Award. Along with our services, we organize different events such as awareness talks, BBC workshops, and one-on-one mentorings, where this event is one of the part of it. Apart from the services and events, we have regulatory information resources for startups to navigate through their regulatory pathways, like white papers. We have QMS templates, TOSHA templates, and standards with us. We have library books. Our clients are across software as medical devices, IVDs, etc. So, thank you. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. We have Dr. Nikhil Khadabade and Perry Maria with us. Dr. Nikhil is a orthopedic medical professional with strong expertise in medical devices, clinical research, and healthcare innovation. He is a chief medical officer at Clever MedTech, where he leads global clinical research initiative, global strategies, and post-market clinical follow-ups activities for medical devices. He also previously worked as a former clinical reviewer at TUB SUD. He leads the clinical team at Mayo AI Healthcare, which is an AI-driven platform on improving clinical decision-making and clinical trials. We also have Perry Maria, which is a lead medical writer with 10 plus year of experience helping medical devices and pharma companies in navigating clinical and regulatory strategies. expertise in clinical evaluations, study design, and identifying regulatory gaps to ensure medical readiness. He has worked across fields like oncology, dermatology, wound care, and dental health. So I request Dr. Nikhil to start with this session.
Thank you, Aishwarya and Manish, for this invite and the introduction. Just to sort of add there, my colleague is Pierre Marie. I think I took a while to get the name right as well after joining Ecleva. So I call him Pierre fondly, but Pierre Marie will do the second half of the presentation. I'll just share my screen. Sorry, I'm slightly distracted by a heavy wind here, which has blown my fence away, but hopefully I can sort it out later. Okay. Can everyone see the screen? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, let me just make this concise. So today will be, I don't know how many of you were there for my previous webinar with the Venture Center. So I talked a bit about the investing landscape, how the investment is changing, especially from conventional medical devices to AI-based software as a medical device. The funding is starting to come back after a small dip in the 2022, 2023. So 2025 has seen a rise in investment in the medtech sector. So I think this the time is right, especially for innovation from India to reach the EU, especially with the EU India trade deal and the UK trade deal as well. So this presentation is to help startups and innovators to get it right when they are designing the evidence strategy at the onset. So my talk will be on designing the clinical evidence for the devices that investors are actually looking for and they trust. Okay. So why this session matters? So you all know the fundraising has changed. So the questions asked by the investors now are more specific questions. Earlier, if you showed some promise, then you were likely to cross the line, get your investment, but they now ask for hard facts. Um So evidence, as you know, is not a single document. You need to provide a strategy as well. You need to have a strong clinical evidence strategy for your product, for a device, and you also need to get the regulatory strategy right with the product. So why the evidence is needed by the investors? You need to put on their hat as well before they invest in you or in your technology. You need to, this basically helps lower their risk of investment. So they are definitely looking for returns on your device, but how do they do that? Is basically looking at what evidence you have generated on your device, which in turn helps bring down the risk for the investment. Okay, so today's agenda, I will be talking on what investors are looking for in the evidence you have designed, the strategy, the regulatory strategy, common mistakes which can weaken the fundraising argument, and also help you build a staged evidence roadmap with budget reality. And Pierre Marie will talk more on how to design these studies, how to structure your intended purpose, claims, classification, how to shape your studies. And when literature alone may be enough, he has supported a lot of studies or projects where we have pushed devices get a CE mark based on literature alone. Uh, and when also we have identified that prospective data may be necessary. Okay, so you need to understand what questions the investors are looking for when you go to them, obviously. So they are looking at broadly five areas. What is the clinical risk of the device? What is the regulatory risk? Adoption risk is a key feature. Reimbursement risk, especially in the West, in EU and in the NHS, in the UK, reimbursement is a big thing, even in the US. Then the execution risk. Okay, so I will go into each aspect in detail and how you can generate or a strategy or build evidence addressing all these risks. Okay, so in terms of clinical risk, so what are the investors really asking? Three questions which define whether the clinical case or the device is investable, or full of their hidden risks with the device? Does it do what it claims to do? Okay, so a lot of these investors talk with when you go to pitch your device or a product, they already engage with clinicians early on. So they involve them to see if this device will provide something meaningful in their day-to-day practice. Okay, so they're also doing their homework. They're involving multiple stakeholders early on. They are talking to the clinical teams. Okay, so first thing they will look at is, does the device do what it claims? And what they will see is whether the evidence directly supports the stated intended purpose, the endpoints are being addressed, is the clinical effect meaningful? So not only the device should do perform better, but how much better does it perform? Is there a metric or is there a number to it? Okay, so investors are asking for hard numbers when you generate your evidence. Will results hold outside the control settings? So that's a key thing. So obviously you perform your you test your device within a controlled environment, maybe a small cohort if it's a clinical trial, but they are actually looking for if there has been a wider adoption of this product, and will this device hold its performance and safety within a wider environment. So I'll give you an example. A wound care, so you have made a wound care product, which and you go to an investor with only the lab data and a small case series. So an example, weak example, especially in the West, would be there's no prospective data. You have not compared it to any comparator, and there are no real world patient outcomes to validate these claims. So if you have all these things, then it makes your case strong. So maybe a prospective study. I know cost is sometimes a limit for these. So you can plan targeted clinical claims, a small cohort of prospective studies. You could involve a few hospitals, okay? And then you could demonstrate statistically and clinically significant improvements in healing time, complication rates, okay? So measurable outcomes, if you demonstrate to the investors, it will support your argument. Then the regulatory risk. So you have gone through the whole clinical sort of strategy pitch, and now the investors are looking at another angle, which is the regulatory angle. Okay, so they will first assess if the classification is correct. They will involve regulatory teams as well to consult on your product. So they are in the background, they're speaking to multiple teams. So I myself speak with a lot of investors. They reach out to me, they provide a brief overview on the product or share something, and then we map it in our head. What could be the time taken for this device to reach the market? Will it face any obstacles? So it's better to involve regulatory teams in your strategy as well when you pitch your product to the investors. So, firstly, you need to get the classification right. Then, are the claims aligned with the evidence? So, every promotional and intended use claim must be traceable back to the clinical evidence. The regulators can pick this easily. So, if you're claiming something, you need to have evidence already in place to claim that. Okay. Then, also, if the regulatory strategy is it credible? So, investors want to see a documented, defensible regulatory plan, not just an assumption. Okay, so having a qualified regulatory affairs lead and a clear notified body engagement strategy are some of the minimum expectations. Okay, may not be initial engagement with the notified body, but at least having someone with a regulatory background within the team can definitely help your case. Okay, so again, a weak example is a company assumes, say, your device is class one and exemption, but upon review by the notified body thinks it is class 2A or class 2B. So this will again add a lot of regulatory burden to your device, so this does not help your cause. So at the outset, if you're prepared for this and if you've mapped everything, then you know that this is a class 2 device, class 2B device, and this is going to take so much time. The third risk is the adoption risk. Okay. So you need to talk to hospitals, clinicians early on to see where it fits in the workflows. Does the device actually slot naturally into existing clinical pathways? Does it create any extra steps? So you need to be mindful of that. So it should fit seamlessly within the workflows. have a word with your clinicians to see if there is any increase in time and burden associated with the use of your technology or the device. Okay, all of you are aware clinical time is very scarce. I have practiced in India. I know the time taken to do a OPD is very less. You don't want additional burden. There's very less time in your theater or the op room as well. So you need to have a solution which obviously you have factored in all these local issues, and also there's a clear user need. Is there an identifiable felt need among the targeted users? So you need to get the essence. Will this device or a technology plug that unmet need from the user? Okay. You should also involve champion clinicians. So why I say this is a lot of uh, adoption is dependent on having some clinicians who are well recognized within the medical device or the clinical community. And if they champion this adoption of the use of your product, there is going to be increased, obviously, sales and adoption will be quicker. So, a weak example again, a digital documentation tool which requires clinicians to perform additional manual data entry steps, then thus it adds a lot of burden. Again, a strong example is a remote monitoring solution seamlessly integrates into the post-op protocols. So, easy guess there, the solution which integrates seamlessly will be adopted quicker. The one of the big questions is, will anyone pay for using it? Okay. How does the hospital get paid? Who's the budget holder? And is there a defined pathway? So it's quite different in India and in the West. In the UK, the reimbursement pathways and in the EU are different to sometimes the ones in India. So you need to factor the fact that how the use of your product or technology can generate revenue and how are you going to be paid for it. Say you have a solution of remote monitoring patient platform and it
It
actually,
actually
is there an
is
echo
there
there?
an
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you properly.
Sorry, there was echo for a while. Yeah. So coming to my example, so you have a remote patient monitoring platform, very innovative solution, tech tool. Uh, it helps reduce the duration of stay in the hospitals. But what does this mean from the hospital? So they buy your tool at a cost, but they may not make benefit to themselves because here in the UK, in the NHS, so if there is reduced hospital admission time, obviously the system is going to be benefited, the whole NHS system. So overall, there will be reduction in cost, but how does it benefit the hospital? Where the hospital is getting paid, they have to pay for your tool, but the benefit is passed on to the whole system. Sometimes they may not even want it, because the NHS pays the hospital for every day of the patient is admitted. So reducing that time of admission may not bring them money. So you need to understand these nuances, how the whole system is getting paid, who's getting paid, and from where you will be making the money. Okay, who's the budget holder? Is there a defined pathway? Are there national reimbursement schemes? How do you get into the hospital tenders? Are there innovation funds? So you need to have big understanding of all these. So there is Germany's DIJA, which is the Digital Health Application Pathway, is a nationally defined structure in Germany. So this is one way where a lot of digital health tools have been deployed and paid via this pathway. So a hospital or a clinic will not pay you directly, but if you make your application through this pathway, there's reimbursement for your digital health tool there. So, but you need to have a solid clinical evidence, which will show how to develop. Then the execution risk. Can this company actually deliver? So lot of clinical studies in medtech, they are complex, they are expensive, prone to delays, and investors scrutinize these in detail. They scrutinize patient recruitment assumptions, site readiness, ethics approval. So you need to have a sound plan to back all these clinical studies which you're planning. Then they will look at the team. They will see whether the team has the experience in medtech. Do they have a clinical affairs, reg affairs people within this setup? And is the timeline realistic? So overly optimistic timelines are a warning sign. So straight away they'll pick up that this is not going to be possible because the investors are quite seasoned, especially in the medtech sector. It's a very niche investment sector, so they can pick up and understand these timelines very quickly. So how do you build evidence strategy, which is of lower risk? Okay, so you need to be clear on what you will claim. So you need to have a precise, bounded claim which is matched to your intended purpose. How will you prove it? You need to have a study design with fixed endpoints. They need to be comparators, and what data sources are going to use. And when will you prove it? Okay, you need to show staged milestones. You need to have a timeline for each aspect of your clinical evidence generation. And also this needs to be mapped to how much it will cost for the each stage of the clinical evidence generation. And what will you do if the data surprises you? There needs to be always a contingency plan. At the outset, you think your device is going to make a drastic improvement in patient quality of life. It will diagnose, but what if it doesn't? So you may need to scale back on your claims. Obviously you have designed something knowing that it's going to work, and there is always some pre-market bench testing and all these other studies there. So you know it will work, but you may need to alter the clinical part of it. So what is the baseline regulatory bar? I'll talk about EU. EU MDR establishes a clear, non-negotiable foundation. So clinical evidence must actively support the safety and performance of the device. So these are two key things which the EU MDR is looking for. So clinical evaluation is mandatory. So every device under the EU MDR requires a documented clinical evaluation. Claims must match your evidence, which I've stressed on earlier. It's life cycle based and it is not one off. So clinical evaluation, it does not end after you get the CE marking. Post market clinical follow up keeps your evidence file current throughout the device lifetime. So what is the bare regulatory minimum versus commercially credible evidence? So a bare minimum would be the baseline your notified body needs to grant approval. So this is the bare minimum. If you don't achieve this, you don't get a CE mark. So it answers a narrow but critical set of questions. The first one is the device safe for its intended use and does it perform as intended? And the key thing is the benefit risk profile acceptable? What is commercially credible evidence? What investors, payers, and health systems need to see before committing? Is it better or meaningfully different versus what is the state of the art? Does it fit into real clinical workflows, which I touched upon earlier? Is there believable adoption pull from the clinicians? And can it demonstrate economic value to the payers? Okay, so I'll give you an example of a wound care dressing. So you have a very innovative wound care product, but you are not clear on the adoption or the market adoption of this product. So I'll give you an example within the UK in the NHS. So there is a formulary committee which looks at all the wound care products, and they would decide if your product goes on to this formulary, then only it will be adopted by the hospitals. So at the outset, you need to plan your evidence which would convince this committee on the formulary. So what is this committee comprised of? In the UK, especially in the wound care sector, clinicians have some say, but not as much say as the tissue viability nurses. They're a stronger authority, especially with regards to wound care, because a lot of that care is happening in the community. So, for them, what is the evidence? What is the value this product is going to bring? Is it going to reduce the number of uh, dressing changes? Is it going to reduce or increase the sort of healing rates? So, all these things, the whole value proposition needs to be provided to this formulary committee in order for your product to be on this list. Once it's on the list, that's when it's going to be prescribed by these nurses, by the clinicians. So you need to plan at the outset, you need to consider the end goal or the end user and the end structure. So if people are aware about this formulary or this NHS procurement list, then only you can frame your evidence in that way right from the onset. So what investors look for in an evidence strategy? Again, Pierre will touch upon these. A clear intended purpose and the exact user, a bounded, credible claim set, a realistic evidence pathway and timeline, a budget that matches the plan, and a team that can execute. And some of these questions are really important when you go to pitch your products. Obviously, I think I have been involved in pitching our product as well, which was Milo Healthcare at the start. So one of the questions which is asked is, what is the clinical problem and who cares most about this problem? Is it the clinicians? Is it the patients? What exactly will you claim on the label? What is your evidence today and not what you're hoping for? What is missing and how will you generate it? So you need to be frank. You need to say that this is not there and I intend to do this in the so and so timelines. What will success look like? What are the endpoints? What you're trying to achieve? What are the measurable endpoints? And what are the thresholds? And lastly, how will you demonstrate real world adoption and value, which I touched upon earlier for the wound care product. You need to demonstrate how it will be adopted in the real world setting and what value proposition it will bring. If you answer these questions, I'm sure you're more likely to uh, have the investor in confidence. So, what makes the evidence feel believable? Clinically meaningful endpoints, a fair comparator. Always it's good to have some comparison to the state of the art, benchmark against the genuine state of the art. Comparing to nothing or to an obviously inferior alternative destroys the credibility. A population that matches real use, a sites that reflect real practice, and obviously how you're managed bias with a clear protocol. So, common evidence mistakes that weaken fundraising: claims are too broad for the current evidence, evidence does not match the final product, vague or unmeasurable endpoints, single site data only, so results from one center, uh, even if they are positive, obviously raise concerns. So, try to have your studies spread across a few sites, having no benchmark and no post market learning plan. So, always factor the fact that you need to have a post market plan because CE marking, as you know, will demand a PMCF plan. So, how to talk about evidence without sounding very defensive? So, when you pitch, so although you may not be confident of the evidence you have generated, so you need to be honest in what you pitch. So, here is what we claim today. So, you can show precisely what is the evidence you have. Uh, Here is what we have already proven. So you have a data, obviously some data in hand, study design, sample. So if you have done it honestly with maintaining to the protocol, I'm sure that will be well acknowledged. So here is what we need to prove. We need to openly say that these are the gaps, and you need to say that you're going to try to plug them with a post-market plan because everyone's aware that MDR has the post-market clinical follow-up. And here is the stage plan and the timelines for these plan and the cost associated with it. So if you are very clear in all these strategies, then I think you generate confidence in the investors. So a big problem is data quality and how do you address this data quality? So some of the investors will ask these questions. How do you maintain the data is of sound standard? So you have provided this data and how do you show it that this data is credible? So some of the data quality risks could be inconsistent data collection across sites or time points, retrospective protocol changes. So you don't want to do any changes to your protocol retrospectively, any missing audit trails, single site datas, undefined analysis plans. So how do you mitigate these? So you standardize early, align data collection instruments, definitions, workflows before the first patient is enrolled, have these studies done across multiple sites where it's possible, predefine the analysis plan, and maintain audit trails. Then coming to AI, because a lot of devices now are moving from, there's a lot of innovation is happening in the AI software as a medical device. So they face a uniquely rigorous level of scrutiny, both from the regulators and the investors. So evidence must be tightly coupled to the specific model version being claimed. So you need to be sure that this is the version you have generated the evidence on. Okay. So evidence model alignment needs to be in place. Investors check that the clinical evidence maps precisely to the exact algorithm version in your regulatory submission. Okay. dataset quality, and representativeness. So the training and the validation datasets must be described in terms of diversity, size, inclusion exclusion criteria, and geographic representativeness. So how do you bias is mitigated needs to be documented as well. And is there a change control and post market monitoring? You need to show a credible plan for how model updates will be governed and how post market performance monitoring and triggers are built in your clinical follow up plan. So, different stages for the evidence roadmap. First is stage one, a feasibility stage. So, it proves basic performance and usability in a real clinical setting. It is usually small, focused, and a quick, fast stage. Then the stage two, which is the clinical value demonstration, prove the outcome direction with a credible, pre-specified design and meaningful comparator. So you need to have a predefined study with a meaningful comparator. Then multi-site confirmation, prove this in across multiple sites, and then have a post-market learning. So you perform your PMCF, so which confirms your ongoing safety and performance. So budget reality and stage planning. So don't do this. This is obviously, I think it depends again on the device and the risk class of the device. So planning one large expensive study early on before the product is even finalized, the claims are even stable, or the endpoint is validated. So don't plan one large study. So instead, plan small, smart studies, use them to validate different endpoints, confirm the feasibility, and build the case for larger confirmatory work later. Okay, so investors strongly prefer a staged evidence plan because it converts development into a series of fundable de-risking milestones. Okay, so having a smaller planned studies is much better, and obviously having representation from different people within the company obviously boosts the confidence in the investors. So what you can keep obviously internally is having a regulatory and a commercial team, so have clinical strategy ownership, quality system accountability, risk ownership, and claims and scope decisions. What you can use external partners for is monitoring or study operations, statistical work, testing, labs and bench work, medical writing, and regulatory authority. Obviously, having a person with regulatory background within the team also helps, but as it gets more challenging, once you start talking to the notified body, it's better to work with external partners. Okay, so now I think Pierre Marie will touch upon what is there in the intended purpose, claims, classification, and the studies. Let's stop here. So if anyone wants to get in touch, that's my email ID, and that's the QR code for the LinkedIn. Feel free to get in touch.
Thank you, Dr. Nikhil. It was really insightful and a lot of information regarding clinical evidence, various aspects of it. Before going to next part, I think we have one question. Can we take that question and then move to second part?
I don't know, Pierre. How long? Okay, I think let's take the question. Yes, no worries.
The question is from Dr. Chandrana. He's
Yeah.
asking that any suggestions when there is no comparator to conduct comparative clinical studies. For example, when the product is an innovation for a pressing need.
For a
So what it means to say that if there is novel idea, novel device, which does not have any comparator,
yes.
and that is for any emergency use, how would
Okay.
you suggest go ahead with this regulatory pathway?
So yeah, this is the exact question which I had to a notified body. Especially a lot of these AI software as a medical device do not have a comparator. There is no device or a similar benchmark device on the market. Their answer was, what is the state of the art? Is there any other way this problem is being solved? Either conventionally, either by a clinician intervention, diagnosis, So there will be a state of the art. How it is being managed, that problem is managed currently. May not be accurately the exact problem, but similar to that problem.
Yeah.
So I think yeah, sorry.
Yes. Thank you so much for the answer.
Oh,
We'll move to
Pierre,
also,
yes,
maybe
Phil.
you want to
yeah,
add?
If I can add, there's actually a MDCG 2024-10 for when there are no suitable comparator. This is really true for orphan device and breakthrough device. So the MDCG acknowledge that when there is no comparator, open label study without control or historical control can be acceptable. But this is not a all-in-all answer. It really depends on the device. But there are ways for devices that do not have a comparator under MDR to still get their data included in the clinical evidence package.
Okay, sure. Thanks for that input. And with that, I think we'll move to the next session. Pierre, over to you.
Let me share my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
So just to a reminder, I'm Dr. Pierre-Marie Boutancourt. I'm the head of medical writing at Eclevar MedTech. I'm really happy to be here and thank you everyone for joining. Today I'd like to walk you to a very important idea that a lot of manufacturers have gone wrong, is that the study design is really not the starting point of your project. The study design is really the consequence of your regulatory positioning. We have a lot of manufacturers, especially those who wish to introduce new products to the market, that came to us for advice on how to design the study when the intended purpose is not defined. This is really the wrong approach under MDR. The sequence is really first the intended purpose, second the class determination, and third you determine the level of evidence you're going to need. Yep. So this is the logic of MDR is actually very straightforward. As I said, first one is define your intended purpose. It means your medical objective, the target population, the condition of use, and above all, the claims you're going to make. The step two is the classification. Is usually the most straightforward the most straightforward to determine. There are a lot of rules of MDR. You just need to be careful to really respect them all. And then once those two are determined, you need to determine to justify the level of evidence you're going to need. The key message here is that really it's your claim that comes first. The study output on all your decisions are not the input. Everything comes down to your claims. So this is really the art of this presentation. If your intended purpose is narrow on a well-established clinical context in a familiar technology, the evidence burden you're going to need to provide are quite small. But the broader your claim, especially if you expand the target population, for example, if you try to include children or even infant or pregnant women, this will induce a need for much stronger clinical evidence. So there is really a direct relationship between the broader and the newer claim, and the harder it will become for the manufacturer to rely on the literature. This means for manufacturer that there is really a regulatory strategy to be made from the beginning on your claim and how narrow or broad you want to have them. Because a narrow claim will be easy to defend and you may be able to use literature alone, but it will reduce your ability to market your product because you cannot make a broad claim in your brochure or in your marketing document. But at the opposite, if you do a broad claim that may sound commercially attractive for your brochure and your marketing campaign, but it will trigger a much heavier evidence requirement. I should put this. Yep. So next step after the intended purpose is the risk classification. So MDR are four class 1 for 2A, 2B, and class 3. And as we move for class 1 for class 3, the expectation are rising. Review become more demanding, the justification need to be stronger, and the tolerance for uncertainty become really lower. For high-risk devices, especially implantable or class 3 device, regulatory and notified body will expect stronger clinical evidence with control of bias, diverse population, and long time follow-up. On a side note here, for those of you who have still medical device under the legacy route, please note that depending on your risk, the legacy device route is going to close really soon as December 2027 for class 3 and class 2B. So to summarize again, for low-risk device and for who have a mature profile, meaning they use established technology, the evidence gap is usually going to be smaller, which reduces the need for a new clinical study. And the higher the risk, the more you use new technology, the higher the need for a clinical study. So the question we have a lot of the time is when literature may be sufficient for your device to get into the market. And we come back to your claims and to your risk classification, meaning that if your device is based on mature technology with a narrow intended purpose, that the safety is well understood and you have access to strong direct clinical data or robust equivalence, or even PMS or PMCF data, literature will be more than enough. But you need all those to be able to rely on literature only. Just keep in mind that equivalence under MDR is quite complicated. It's not the FDA. Unless you are the owner of the equivalence product, this is not a route we recommend. It's usually a downfall because you need really a lot of documentation and contracts which are hard to get. On a side note, some of you may be aware we have recently been having an update on MDR, especially on Article 61.6b, which was commonly known as a wet list for well-established device. So the Article 61.6b already contain a limited exception for certain type of device which were considered well established, that if they provide sufficient clinical evidence, did not need to do any to have any clinical data. So the list on the 20th of March have been expanded. So more device may now move from new clinical investigation is mandatory to you must justify whether the existing evidence is sufficient. But please note that this exemption from mandatory is not an exception to present clinical evidence. Even if your device is within the list, you still need to present clinical evidence, for example, from the literature to certify the MDR requirement. And also, this update really help you as a manufacturer only if your device exactly fell on the expanded list. So the question is when prospective clinical data is needed. So, well, first of all, as we just say, when you are outside of the exemption, so when your device is not covered by Article 61.6b, when you try to expand your claim or provide new grip on new indication, product broader target group and new user, and that you cannot rely on the literature because there is just no literature out there. When you have a new technology, so limited history, limited compatibility, and no clear state of the art about that technology, you will have to provide prospective clinical data. And when you cannot rely on equivalence, meaning your demonstration of equivalence is incomplete, you do not have access to the technical file or your equivalent device. So if you do not have your own device and you cannot rely on the equivalence data, you will have to do a prospective to obtain prospective clinical data. And even if you do have your own data and you manage to check all the boxes above, in your clinical evaluation report, if there are still gaps in the safety, in the performance, or even in the clinical benefit, you will have to collect prospectively those data to close those gaps before the next certification. One of the questions we also have is how can you use data that were generated outside Europe for Europe submission? There is really a misconception here. The misconception is that the regulator in Europe require a fixed percentage of local data. In reality, in EU MDR, there is no mandatory local versus foreign data ratio. What matters the most is whether your study was conducted in compliance with GCP or whether the evidence you produce are applicable to your target population and the intended use. That's why global study can absolutely be used to support EU submission, including in the study have been done in India, provided that your documentation is strong, your traceability is strong. Our advice here is that if you have performed a clinical study on your device, is to publish those results in a peer-reviewed journal. In our experience, the scrutiny for those data is really less when they come from a peer-reviewed journal than when the manufacturer only discloses them in the clinical evaluation report. That is, if the study was conducted in compliance with GCP and if the raw data are available upon request by the notified body. In some case, from some really specific device, bridging cohort might still be useful. Not because of regulatory mechanism, but mainly because it may help address clinical differences in population characteristic or clinical practice. Those are really specific devices, but if you have something that targets specific color of skin or really population characteristic, you may need to have some data on other population. But this is really the exception, not the norm. And the real success factor is really your documentation. Notified body can be really picky about the relevance, the comparability, the traceability, and the auditability of your clinical data. So really here, the best strategy is to design your study for a global submission rather than just local, rather than trying to retrofit a study you perform without having the global submission in mind. And you also, as a manufacturer, need to keep in mind that clinical evidence is really not the whole story. Your whole operating model has to be MDR compliant. For manufacturers that use, as I said before, that still have device on the EU market using the legacy route, the deadlines are coming. They are coming fast. And we really recommend to not plan the transition at the last minute, hoping for a change on the EU regulation, because even if it comes, it's not going to come in time. And you may risk having your CE marking not renew. And as I said earlier in the start, if you are launching or transitioning an MDR device, really the first thing you need to do is the intended purpose and the class risk. This is all really the center of all your clinical evaluation report and all your documentation. If you are also a manufacturer outside Europe, you need to secure an EU representative as early as possible. And keep in mind that the EUDAMED registration is going to be mandatory from May 2026. And the 4 modules, to be precise, are going to be mandatory to use. So just take our message for you to conclude this presentation is really, it's your claim and your intended purpose that will drive the level of evidence and the type of evidence you're going to need. The classification risk of your device really drives the scrutiny of the notified body, which with the level of scrutiny the notified body will review your document. And literature is really only enough when you use low-class device or really well-established technology device. And even if you are on the waitlist, exception from investigation does not mean exemption from clinical evidence. You still need to produce clinical evidence to get your products on the market. Well, thank you much for your attention. If you have any question, I will be happy to answer them.
Thank you. So before we address the questions, I request participants to turn on their camera so we can have a. That is okay.
Pierre, can you please stop sharing your screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you so much, Pierre, again, for providing the insights about the data requirement, the clinical data, and the brief touch upon the UDAME database and the requirement for active registrations for Indian manufacturers. So there are a couple of questions that we have in chat box. I'll just read out the first question, which is if you have a predicate device for sterile class A or class 1 device, did comparatives and they also have completed comparative studies in lab and clinicians have used those devices. They're asking, do you still need a planned clinical study for regulatory clearance for CE?
This is a tough question without knowing the device. It really depends on your claims and how broad they are. If you are really small claim that are only based on performance, usually those kind of device can be enough. If your claims are much broader and you really have the notion of clinical benefits or improvement for the patient, it will be hard to rely on those study alone.
Okay, so it means that you need to understand what is your claim, what is your intended use, and how similar the comparative device is. If there are large differences or many differences which can affect the safety and effectiveness, then you have to look into the data from literature perspective also, and also take help from clinical expert whether to go ahead for clinical studies. If I'm not wrong, right?
Correct.
Yes. Okay. The second question is how to maintain traceability, which is acceptable globally. How much using validated CT data? Okay. First question is that how to maintain traceability, which is acceptable globally.
Nikhil, do you want to take this one? You're on mute.
So traceability of clinical trial data. Obviously, I think looking into the second part of the question, having these sort of platforms, data capture platforms helps. It does instill that trust, especially to the clinical reviewer, because I myself have reviewed some of these data sets when the devices come for CE marking. So knowing that, because the protocol sometimes do state that data would be collected through this system or that, and then there would be a report generated based. But sometimes we look at the origin of each data set. If Medidata or RedCap or say Milo or platform can capture the data set through the whole process, uh, how it is transferred from one step to the other. So that needs to be that audit trail needs to be there basically. So at no stage the data should be changed. Obviously, the where one handover of data from one point to another, it needs to be uniform. So having these data capture platforms helps, but you could do it any other way as well. If you have a very clean process.
Yes. So essentially, you should have a protocol also to
Yes.
handle that data through the platforms like metadata.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. There is another question. I hope it's fine that we can take a couple of more questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Scroll. Next question is it possible to change the claims later after a few years, let's say, when more evidence is available? In short, launch early and easily with simpler claims and then move to more aggressive ones.
Yes, definitely. This is really usually the approach we recommend. Get your market on narrow claim, even if it's mean that you are not able to market as aggressively as you could. Build up the evidence through PMS and PMCF, and then expand your claim and update your brochure and marketing strategy.
Okay. So start with the simpler device so that there is less burden of evidence.
Yep.
And then go ahead once you generate data. And lastly, yes, go ahead. Sorry.
The main reason for that is that under MDR, PMCF are pretty much mandatory. You will have to do them one way or another. And this way, when you use narrow claim, you can get your market on the device much faster. And since you're gonna have to do PMCF anyway, you can use that opportunity to collect the data you need for your narrow claim as a surveillance, but you can also use them to collect the evidence you're gonna need for those much broader claim. This way you do two birds with one stone.
Sure.
Yeah, because invariably, sometimes these devices would be used in off-label setting as well, and there would be some extra data which can come out from there. But largely, it will support your safety data.
Okay, sure. And lastly, there is question from Dr. Bipin Deshpande. He's saying that there is well-established technology for wound healing, and he is developing the similar device in Indian market. So the advice regarding clinical data, the literature data, will it still applies to these kind of devices, or there will be exemptions or reduction of data evidence?
So in terms of wound healing, Pierre, so there is a device which this technology already exists in the international market, but a similar product is being developed. Is that correct? And
Yes.
is it necessary still to implement all the given advices before marketing this device?
Wound dressing is really a complicated area. There is a lot of wound dressing on the market, but actually the level of evidence for those kind of technology is really not that high when you start really looking into it. And especially if you are targeting to get reimbursement in EU, you will need specific evidence, and usually this requires a full clinical investigation with a comparator. You may be able to get your product on the market, especially if it's in the low class, without a clinical evidence. But if you want to get reimbursement, you will not have the choice.
Okay. Sure. Thank you.
So I hope this session has helped in bridging the gap between what is required and what is actually trusted. Thank you to both the speakers and thank you for participants for joining in. We have shared a feedback form in the chat. And thank you once again. You see you all in our next upcoming session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nikhil. Thank you, Pierre. We hope to see you soon again.
Yes.
And for the participants, please leave your feedback before leaving the meeting. If there are any other questions, we'll compile those and we'll try to answer them after the session.
Yeah, send it to us via email and we'll try to reply.
Sure. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you much.
Mm-hmm.